Hello, and welcome to our next edition of Mixing Light's Office Hours, where I gather some contributors from our website and we ask member questions. If this is your first time, we are streaming live to YouTube, but we're actually holding this in a Zoom room where our members, our paid members, have a link and they can join us and they can ask questions and we're monitoring the chat within the Zoom room. And today we've got two member questions we're going to be answering, and that should leave us time for a general discussion. So if you want to talk with us and you're in the Zoom room, feel free to check your camera and make sure things are working, and then you'll be able to raise your hand. And at any point, if you want to jump into the conversation as we're talking about these topics, raise your hand. I'll call you in when we're talking about the submitted questions. And then afterwards, you can raise your hand if you just want to ask a completely random question and join us on this call. We'll run for 60 minutes, pretty hard out, because we've got working professionals with us. All of our contributors are professionals. They've got clients and schedules and calendars. So we won't be running over. So that's where Daria's there with the watch. And so we won't be running over. So to get us started, what I'm going to do is we're going to go to each of our contributors and just talk about something new that you're excited about, something maybe you've learned recently that's new or you've done recently. Does not have to be related to our business, just a way of kind of, getting the juices flowing. For some of us, it's early in the morning, and just kind of get the conversation going, get us excited, and kind of humanize everyone here. And I am going to, as I like to do when we have a new contributor, a new to Mixing Light contributor who's joined the team, we've got one of those right now. We've got Daria Fissoun. Did I say that right, Fissoun, Daria?
Yeah, pretty close. Daria Fissoun.
Fissoun, okay, Daria Fissoun, and out of London. And Daria has just joined us as a Mixing Light contributor, so you can expect to see her in the near future on Mixing Light. And Daria, why don't you just kick off this call and just give us like the 2-minute summation of your career and what you do for a living, and maybe why you're here on Mixing Light.
Well, hi, I'm Daria Fissoun, and I'm a colorist and a compositor, and I also develop the training materials for DaVinci Resolve's color page. So that's the book you'll find on Blackmagic Design's training webpage. And I've been doing that for 6 or 7 years now. And it all started off because at the time I was teaching at a film school, and I was teaching color grading in DaVinci Resolve, and there was very few resources. This was probably a good 8-9 years ago. And eventually I was so tired of being asked the same questions. I was I'm just going to record 5-minute videos of every single feature. And then every time a student asks me something, I'll send them a link. And the side effect of that was that Blackmagic eventually reached out to me, and they were like, oh, hey, it was Patty. And she was like, do you want to, develop training materials for us? And I had to run her email address through one of those scam check websites to make sure I wasn't about to get fleeced. Genuinely, I was like, why are they reaching out to me? It's so weird. And yeah, got the rest is history. I wrote a couple of chapters for the beginner's guide, and then they just gave me the whole color book, and I was really fun. And since then, I'm kind of juggling, professional grading and compositing and training as well.
That's great. And we're excited to have you. And in case, a lot of people probably know you from, what was the name of your channel? I'll let you tell us what the name of your channel. I know what it was.
It was a very cutesy name, Goat's Eye View. Yeah.
Goat's Eye View. And you were probably the original DaVinci Resolve YouTuber. I mean, there was no one more popular and no one had more traffic when it came to DaVinci Resolve than you did, Daria, at that time.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really unexpected because I wasn't pushing the channel. It was genuinely, I was doing it for the school, and then out of nowhere, people just started subscribing. I was like, wow.
That's brilliant. And so now, and you're also the person who, essentially you've wrote the manual for the color page, the training manual for the color page. So when you go to Blackmagic's website, to their training section for DaVinci Resolve, there's a PDF that's dedicated to the color page. Download that PDF, there's downloadable footage, and then you can also click a button to take, after you've gone through the PDF, which is free, you can then take the certification button. And so that's all you've basically wrote the book and then designed the certification class.
I wrote the exam too, so like if you got any complaints about the phrasing, just get in touch. I'll fix it.
There you go. Exactly. So, all right, Daria. So we're going to start with the question of the day, where we start with office hours, which is we're going to go around the horn very quickly, a couple minutes each of us, on something new that you've learned that you'd like to share with the rest of the class.
Yeah, so I've actually been on a real like learning kick lately. As we all do. Like I got paranoid about how much I actually don't know in this field. So I have been reading this website. It's called The Hitchhiker's Guide to Digital Color, and it goes pretty deep into like chromaticities and luminance, how pixels work, how displays work, alpha channels. So there's lots of good stuff in there. Like I really started to appreciate, like, the ever famous CIE 1931 graph. Like it only just occurred to me that it doesn't really show like intensities of color, like the depth. So I was looking like animations of it. I was like losing my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, this suddenly makes so much sense. Why saturation doesn't work the way you expect it to, which is what we're talking about later today. So yeah, very handy.
Yeah, color volume, and the
Yeah.
fact that it's actually a 3D space, and you put it to paper and you have to take a slice, a 2D slice of it,
Yeah.
and there are shortcomings to that. Absolutely, it's like on our scopes too. You get some of these 3D volumetric scopes that you can get on some of these third-party scopes that are kind of interesting ways of looking at your color information. All right, so now we are going to head over to the West Coast of the United States, and I'm going to start with Cullen. Excuse me. Cullen, what have you learned recently that you'd like to share with the class?
Oh my goodness, I'm learning many things right now, and lots of them totally unrelated to color grading these days. As I am watching my 16-month-old grow up and watching her wires
16
connect.
months already?
Yeah,
Holy
isn't that
cow.
crazy? Yeah,
Man. Wow.
yeah, it's completely fascinating from like just an anthropological POV, like watching the neurons connect up and like connections get formed and all that stuff. So lots of learning and insights there. But in the like humble world of color grading, the big thing that I'm learning or focusing on right now is, like, as many of you guys know, I'm a huge fan of look development, and I've gone through all kinds of crazy textbooks and maths and like learning side quests to improve my look dev chops. And the thing that I'm learning right now is essentially that the further you get away from good old RGB and manipulating the 3 channels that were captured and the 3 channels that are going to be shown at the end of the process, the more likelihood of getting unexpected or unusual or problematic results you're generally going to encounter. So long way of saying, keep it simple, stupid. I'm learning that anew and having a lot of fun by insisting on simplicity, even in the complex world of look development.
That might go wide. That might speak to why you don't see a lot of people talking about working in alternate color spaces within nodes in DaVinci Resolve, which you can easily do. Now, we've had some recent insights. Hector, I think, did a very recent one about hue and adjusting hue and going into an alternate color space and adjusting hue and how it gives you completely different results. But you don't see a lot of people kind of saying, I'm building my entire pipeline along one of these alternate color spaces. Yep. And what I'm hearing you say is there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I think so. It's so easy to forget that we capture a certain amount of red, green, and blue, and that's what we end up showing. So anything that you do that's not in that domain in between is, a recontortion of the image data, and it can be done super well, but it's also very easy to do poorly.
All right, so I'll go next, and then Jason, you'll be the last one to follow up this introductory section. Something that I've learned new recently, I've been given permission to say this. I'm really excited. I have to tell everyone I'm really, really excited right now. Mixing Light has an exclusive. We will be releasing it on Friday in the Insights library. The video I'm editing together to support the article, I think I'm going to make it available on YouTube as well, because I was given the privilege of getting a first look at a brand new display from Flanders Scientific. They will be releasing it. If you're in LA and you're available Friday, and you're watching this, you need to be at Cinegear. You need to go to Cinegear and you need to see their new display that they have out. I can't talk about any more details other than I'm really, really, really excited. we talked, I think, 2 office hours ago about how we are in this desert when it comes to reference displays. And we are in this desert of technology. And, there are a couple technologies out there, but we haven't seen any of them get executed in the reference display space. And there didn't seem to be anything on the horizon that seemed to actually work. Well, Flanders Scientific has cracked the nut. You've probably heard about this display panel technology. I'm not going to reveal it here. I'm not authorized to do that, but I will tell you that come Friday, we have a roadmap. And this is a high-end display they're going to be releasing. It's going to be expensive, but there's a roadmap where you can look at this and say, oh my God, like in 2 or 3 years, we've got a shot at having really affordable high-end displays, much that are in line with where we were, say, 5 years ago. So I'm really excited about this. Again, if you're going to be on that, I think it's on the Paramount lot, is Cinegear this year. And so if you can get there, check it out. It's phenomenal. I spent an afternoon with them, drove 8 hours up and 8 hours back just to see this thing. I'm very appreciative to Bram Desmet over at FSI giving me this kind of first look. And it's very exciting. We've got something new also on MixingLight. If you're on a corporate account, I've had a couple people email me who are on corporate accounts for MixingLight. So your company can get multiple seats of MixingLight at a big discount because you're buying them for multiple people. And we've just released the ability to then unlock all of our courses if you're on a corporate account for everyone on your corporate account. Now, the truth is most people on corporate accounts are post houses, things like that. So the courses are really great reference manuals. They're great. Like, oh, what does this thing do? Let me do a quick search in the PDFs and see if it's talked about in any of those courses, or if you've got assists or people who are coming up that you want to get trained up in a corporate environment. They're awesome for that. So if you're interested in corporate accounts, reach out to us. It's on the website. You can email us directly on the Contact Us page. If you have a corporate account, the person who owns the account can log in and release the courses for everyone on their account. So that's the other really exciting new thing that I'm very excited about. So I'm in a good mood this week. And now, Mr. Bowdach, you get to bring us up on the rear. What have you done recently that is exciting and new for you?
Well, for those that aren't aware, I've started a new podcast called Color and Coffee. And in the creation of that, I've been exploring a lot of the new AI features in DaVinci Resolve, one of them being the new text editorial features that was released in beta 3. So I've been having a lot of fun with that. The entire podcast has been edited with the text-to-speech feature, the transcription features that came out in beta 3. So that was a lot of fun to play with that. It definitely has a work in progress. There was a lot of fixing that I had to do. So I'll be reporting to Blackmagic on that, but it really has come a long way. So it's honestly, it's really, really impressive where we've come with that. And it's fun as a colorist to see how quickly we can put together essentially a paper edit. So it's fun to jump into that and see how far our transcription have gone and how quickly you can basically record a raw a raw video and essentially put together a rough edit and hand it off to an offline editor and get that turned around.
Yeah, I've been playing not so much for editing, but for subtitles on MixingLight Insights. And, YouTube has auto-generated subtitles, and I've experimented with subtitling for Insights for probably 5 years now. I mean, this technology started being introduced by third parties. It was relatively expensive. I mean, it would take, an 8-minute video would cost, $20, $30 to get that done. And not just auto, but also have a human then come in behind it. Because a lot of the higher end services, you would have the computer do the first pass. Then they had humans who would double check it. And then you would build out libraries of words for the humans for, pronouns and like, like the name of DaVinci Resolve. How do you spell that? How do you spell that pronoun? How do you spell, these different things? So, and I am amazed at what I'm seeing in DaVinci Resolve now. I mean, it's been getting steadily better. The video hosting software we use on MixingLight auto-generates captions. I've been relatively happy with them. They'll mangle names, It'll mangle some software, but for the most part, it gets it right. And DaVinci Resolve now is probably a step above that. I find that it gets names right more often than not. It might get spellings wrong, like Bowdach. Like I know with you, your last name, it just mangles. I mean, yeah. But it gets, commas and question marks. In beta 1, the word color was spelled as in British English. So it was COLOUR. In beta 3, I just noticed the last time I did it like 2 days ago, it spells American English. It drops the U. I don't see any options for a library to choose between the two. So it's just kind of default as to which version of English they're going to be spelling with. They added on the subtitles, they added a lot more options in terms of going to two lines instead of one. But you can also kind of control the width of the captions. So I've loved it. It's been fantastic. And then, if I make editorial changes afterwards, the edits go with it. As long as it's auto selected, the edits will go, your edits will happen with the subtitles.
Yeah, it's not quite up to, I'll be perfectly honest, it's not quite up to like Descript level where I can literally remove filler words without having to go in there and edit it, where I can have a database of words and remove uhs and ahs and a full database of known filler words. But I have a feeling that we're going to get there. And it's not a monthly subscription. So we are definitely moving towards a reality where these tools have made this so much faster for us.
It has, although now it's like now, I do an office hours when I review the edit for office hours, I spend an hour now just watching the subtitles. And so it just gives me another thing to do now. But it's fantastic to have it built in. I don't have to pay I don't have to pay a third-party software provider to do it. And it's pretty brilliant. And I agree. I actually find it kind of exciting as well. So that's kind of cool. All right. So that wraps up the first part of our discussion. I noticed in the chat here, a couple questions about people are excited about the new FSI monitor, and Evan asks, I hope ML does an insight about it ASAP. You'll have it Friday. So I was up there last week. I recorded an interview with Bram. I got a look at the display. They have amazing demo material. And we actually ran it when we looked at it, we ran it against, he has one of the new laptops, the Apple laptops that have the same screen as the iPad. And we really took a close look as to how the display technology differs and the step up that his new displays will show us. So I'm really excited. You'll actually see where now you see like highlights, and you'll see almost looks like the sensor clipped out, where we've been seeing clipped out data where it looks like it's clipped out. In the new display, you're actually seeing fine detail in those highlights, and it's brilliant. So we're getting closer and closer to the point where the ones and zeros that are on our hard drives are being replicated on our reference displays, where we're actually seeing the fine nuanced details of those ones and zeros, not just in terms of luminance, but also in color volume too. So really super exciting. All right. So, Jason, color is the dictionary spelling, C-O-L-O-R. We're not going to get into that discussion. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, share my screen, and we're going to hit the first question of the day. And this one was brought by Neil Haugen, who is a MixingLight contributor. And he has a question for us about using HDR graphic white creatively. So he writes in, HDR presents such an intriguing and wide range of new puzzles, which it is. One question, the graphics white versus speculars. So specular highlights. I'd like to know, what are your thoughts on what is the difference and how to creatively use that difference if it's actually a thing that you can actually, there's a creative difference between these things. So I'll put this out to our panelists here on today's office hours. Who wants to tackle this first? If none of you raise your hand, I'll reach out and we'll start. Go, one of you, do it.
I got some ideas I can talk about on specular versus graphic white. So definitely think it's a thing, first of all. And here's what I would say, there's a bit of a mental shift that has to come with HDR, where we're just so used to being constrained to a 100 nit or 48 nit ceiling in motion image mastering that as HDR has come along and we've now got, whatever, depending on where you set your speed limit and depending on the peak white of your display, you could have 300, 400, 500, you could have 1,000 nits for your peak white. Those are going to be, the higher that number goes, the more of that sort of range from 0 to N of your peak, the more of that upper register is really going to be reserved for speculars. Like I can tell you, in a 1,000 nit master, like for me personally as a colorist, most of the time I will try to convince my clients to stay lower, like way lower than 1,000, even for like glints of sunlight off of a lake, like pure twinkly, sparkly, specular type stuff. So regardless of where exactly you set that ceiling, the question is, well, where should graphics sit in relation to that, or where can they sit? So if we think about using it creatively, like for me, that's going to mean generally not wanting to go much above 100 nits for like, if you think about a white piece of text, like a lower third or something like that, I don't see much reason aesthetically for that to go above 100 nits. It's not like it makes it more legible or easy to read. And at a certain point, you're starting to get kind of a recoil factor of like, that's kind of unpleasant to look at, even if it's only occupying a small portion of the frame. So definitely think it's a thing that kind of comes with the larger consideration of like, all right, where am I setting my like absolute peak of my system? And then where do I want my, like white graphics or other colored graphics for that matter to rest in relation to that peak position?
If I could pop in here for just a second. Can you hear me?
Neil. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because I know in talking at NAB with Eric Philpott was actually the most useful person for me to talk with on this stuff in the Adobe booth. And he was saying that they use the graphics white setting, whether, because they give you the option of 203, 103, 203, or 303. And he was saying that they use that in, it has an effect on the remapping of your, or the tone mapping that they use if you're applying, say, HLG or PQ, that it's a little different. They use a slightly different tone mapping in HLG or PQ, and that changes dependent upon how you've got that thing set. So that he didn't tell me exactly what change it makes, but it makes some change in their tone mapping. And so I was wondering for especially further information about that, what kind of a change that would make. Does Resolve do something like that? And just because this stuff, I don't happen to have a nice Sony or Flanders $30,000 monitor where I can, and scopes where I can really check out exactly what's happening. So I need to learn it like this as much as possible so I can have a freaking idea of what I'm doing.
Yeah, I
jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, I can say I'll throw in a small comment, because ultimately I'm not an expert in those different like 201, 301 specs that you just mentioned or their behavior within Resolve. I can say this, something that really frustrates me as an end user of the technologies that we're talking about. It's like all I want out of, like, if you tell me PQ or HLG or anything else, I expect to encode a signal that will be 100% inverted by the display. So if there's any sort of asymmetry there, that frustrates me, because it's a black box even if I can figure out what's going on in there, I have to do that math. So for me, I'd rather be like, hey, if it says gamma 2.4, put a power of 1/2.4 and then let the display do the inverse of that. And then whatever creatively I want to do underneath that is my prerogative and that of my clients. So I feel like, with the graphics white thing, I'm like, I'm perfectly capable of parking like graphics at the level that I want. But if we're talking about a forward display encoding that is creating an asymmetrical relationship with the behavior of the display itself, that is something that's like talked about and fairly common out there, but it always frustrates me. Like, why are we doing that? Just make them discrete pieces. Anyway, that's not a great answer, because I know the particulars of the behavior we're talking about within Resolve. I'm not sure if any of the rest of the group maybe does.
Daria, I know that you've been heavily looking at fusion color management. Have you run into this on that end of things as well? Like, has in your exploration of fusion color management, has this topic been something that you've had to investigate or come across?
Yeah. I've been investigating, the color shift that occurs between Fusion and all the other pages whenever you start working on anything above SDR in Resolve. And I did end up coming up with like a workflow that allowed you to kind of solve that without relying on third-party like plugins or any special LUTs. So I wasn't really thinking in regards to like particular displays. I just wanted it to display exactly the same in the edit page as it does in Fusion. Like as to particular values, I mean, right now I know how to get it to 100% what you're seeing in the edit page. After that, it's kind of up to you to decide how you want to grade that, if you want to dampen it. The last time I was involved in like HDR deliverables was for a Disney show that I was doing with Mike Smolin. And I'm kind of like Neil here. I also don't have like a robust set of like hardware for monitoring HDR. I don't get requested HDR very frequently still. And when I do, I find it's more affordable to rent out a suite than it is to have my own equipment at this point. But when we were doing it 3 years ago, it still felt like a bit like what's it called? Not No Man's Land. What's the other one? It's like a Wild West. That's it. Where you're just kind of like figuring things out as you go. And I actually texted Mike Smolin yesterday, and he said we delivered in the HDR pass. We had a 1000 nit HDR deliverable, and our titles were around 400 nits. So probably a little too bright, a little too hot for what you'd be doing nowadays. But he also said, interestingly, that he would adjust text brightness based on the background of the shot. So presumably if it was darker, then he would lower the nits. Otherwise you'd feel like you were staring at the sun in the middle of the night. Yeah, that's kind of my minor contribution to this, I'm afraid.
What about you, Jason?
So I'm going to come from a different viewpoint in the fact that for those who don't know, I'm a little bit of a gamer, and an interesting viewpoint that I'm seeing from a lot of video games that are powered by the Unreal Engine is I'm seeing them recently over the last year offer essentially a option inside the engine to give you a different graphics option to set it at different nit levels. And what that tells me is that this is not just something that we're having trouble with. We are having this issue throughout anything that displays on HDR television. So we're having these problems with video games as well. And so it's just everything that's displaying on HDR televisions. We are essentially struggling with this extended dynamic range. And how do we display it properly? How do we make sure that everybody can see it? And most importantly, how do we teach people to deal with that physiological effect when they see this really bright text and they get that physiological effect that they're not used to with SDR televisions? And that's really what people are not used to. Usually they'll get it and they'll get blasted in the face and they'll go, you know what, this is just too bright for me. I can't do this. And I think there's a little bit of education involved, but also there's a big settings change. And I think this is why we're seeing a lot of people go, you know what, I don't want HDR. It's just not for me. It's a combination of a technology rejection. It's a combination of bad settings, and it's a combination of the content not being properly set for the technology.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I think I agree with what everyone has said here on this topic. I think there's a couple of things to unpack here. So to get back to Neil's initial question, my perspective on this is I believe Dolby Vision will take into account when it does its trims. So in other words, you grade HDR, but when you say, okay, give me my trims at 600 nits, it will take into account the where you set that kind of the flat white levels, right? So in theory, that 200 nit value is kind of think of a reflective card, a white card that reflects back. Where do you want that to sit? It's not a specular highlight. Specular highlights are for glints. They're for sources of light, right? And so I believe Dolby Vision does take that into account when it's trying to derive other versions, and especially the SDR version of your HDR grade if you're executing a Dolby Vision workflow. I don't know about HDR Plus. I don't know if HDR Plus will do that because it's kind of the active version, the free version of Dolby Vision. And I don't know if they're using that particular data point in their derivations. So I don't have an answer on that. So I think from a Dolby Vision perspective, you might have some creative use there in terms of how you want those whites to look in the derived versions of your HDR grade. So that's one possibility. The other thing too is it's really important that whatever you set that at, if you're getting stuff from visual effects or you're getting stuff from graphics, everyone needs to be in sync on it. Everyone needs to know where these white levels are. You really technically don't want your colorist managing that. Like you set it, and then that everything that comes in is at that space. So, you know, it's not one of these things that you're going to be halfway through the grade and start changing it, right? This is going to be a decision you make up front, and then you're just going to live with it. Most likely, unless, you know, you're the one-man band and you have total control over your environment and you decide for creative reasons, you might have a use for that. So that's kind of my understanding of what's going on there. Did we answer your question, Neil?
I think that's one of those things that it's like Daria said, it's kind of wild, wild west still. And so trying to sort out exactly what it's doing seems an interesting thing. And I wish I could get a better handle on it.
So this might help you, because this is something that Jason brought up. We're in a situation now where the color volumes we're working at, the nit ranges we're working at, the brightness values we're working at exceed the ability of any modern display to reproduce, right? So, you know, we had when HDR came out and the specifications were designed to exceed our ability to actually see it right now today, with the knowledge that eventually we will be able to have displays that can fully show us the full color volume at the full brightness range, right? And so we're working under specifications that exceed our deliverables. And in many cases, all of our work, technically, I think probably all of the work we're doing at any level is somewhat compromised by that. Like, we don't actually know what the ones and zeros that we're putting on the drives are actually telling us. We think we do based on, you know, the display I'm using behind me. That's an LG right there. If I'm going to grade HDR to that, I am going to make decisions based on its loading behavior, unique to that particular consumer display that does not anywhere come close to the specification we're working against. So I think that's, for you, Neil, and for most of us, that's the thing we're running against. I mean, it's the worst thing it's the worst thing you tell a colorist, which is you can't trust your monitor, right? I mean, what the hell are we supposed to do? But I think there's a certain range at the high nit level, high saturation, where I think, yeah, as we're kind of little blind, you got to rely on your scopes, maybe be a little conservative. And so that when it's revealed 5 years later what you actually did, you're not surprised in a bad way, right? And so I think that asks for a more conservative approach. It'll be interesting to see, in a couple of years, what some of those early HDR grades on Netflix look like. Do they still hold up? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if anyone gets to Cinegear this year, this week, and you look at the demo images at FSI, looking at that display. Yeah. I can tell you that there's some beautiful ones, but there are a couple shots in there where I'm looking at it. It's gorgeous. It shows off the display, and I'm like, I bet you the colorist would redo that shot based on what I'm seeing right now. It looks great, shows off the display, but I bet you from an aesthetic point of view, they would redo that shot. And it's not the fault of the display, and it's not the fault of the colorist.
Well, I know from that monitor crawl we did at NAB, if I were the colorist on that Sony setup, yeah, if I was looking at that and seeing the shots that were coming across, I would have been wanting to regrade a few things on that, because that just looked strange at times.
But that was the question, but Neil, that gets to the question of, is it the colorist or is it the display? Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, that display was clearly overpumped. It was driving way too hard. It didn't match the reference to the secondary display that's been shipping, the 310 or whatever it is that they had next to it. And so, that one, I just couldn't tell. I couldn't tell, was it just the display, just it's a prototype, it's immature, it's got a ton of problems, and they're overdriving it? Or was it the color, they did a color grade to that display and they didn't know what to do? Tough to tell, chicken and egg.
I also think that our part of our job now, although we have reference monitors, but a big part of our job now is understanding how our grade translates to a wide variety of displays. And that's even more true, especially in HDR, than it has been in SDR, because of the technology, because of how widely the grades look on a wide variety of displays. And that gets more difficult on the higher you go, especially as you go into Dolby Vision and you get the different formats. And I think that that's really difficult to understand how your grade spreads out on the different both technologies and types of displays.
All right, so I'm going to, because we've got about 20 minutes left, so let's get on to the second question. I think Neil, we got about as close to that answer as to the creative uses of that function as we can probably get at this point. But that was a good question and a great discussion. Thank you very much. So let me go ahead and share my screen for our next question, which is saturation for a punchy look. Johan N. wrote, I was recently on a job grading smaller assets from a commercial. They showed me the spot and I was very impressed with how the colorist dealt with saturation. It was a very push teal and orange look, with Mad Max being an obvious reference. The look felt very meaty. Is that a term we even use? I love that term, by the way. I think that's a great color grading term in the room. With really good color separation, but somehow felt good and did not look artificial. I was wondering how you deal with saturation, since saturation is so much more than just twisting the sat knob. I included a reference from Mad Max that I felt was very close to the commercial, and this is the Mad Max reference image that he dropped down. I'll leave that open for a moment. And which one of our contributors would like to jump in to get this conversation going? I'm going to go to Daria. Let's start with you. You're the new kid on the block.
Let's do it. Well, actually, first thing I did when I first saw this image was I loaded it into Resolve because I wanted to check out the waveforms. And so what I thought was really interesting is that it is indeed a very saturated image. It's almost at 75%, like especially like for the orange tones in the bottom half. But what's interestingly is that it does not exceed 65% in luminance. So it's actually very dampened, and I think that's what makes it so effective. The colors are strong, but they're not bright. They're not artificially elevated, if that makes sense. And I think that was the key here, was like deepening it, which then brought to mind there's a creator of DCTLs, Stefan. I don't know if anyone's seen his work. His last name, Stefan Ringo-Schwantner. He's got a website, Mononodes, and he's just released a DCTL called Color Shift, in which she allows you to adjust saturation in a subtractive manner. So it produces very different results from what you see in like the tools we have in Resolve. So then I was experimenting with, saturation, with color boost, and with his color shift DCTLs, and I was getting some really interesting results, and it really got me to appreciate intensity versus depth of color. So I think that's something worth exploring, especially the color boost, which, like if you, like it prioritizes areas of low saturation and it pushes them further or lower, depending on what you're doing. So definitely, yeah, there's more to it than just saturation. Luminance played a key part in that particular image. I think Cullen?
Cullen and Jason, I know both of you have a lot to say on this topic.
Yeah, take it away, Jay.
Well, I'll jump in. I was going to say it's me or Cullen. We're going to jump in. I'm a huge fan of saturation. I'm actually currently building a saturation tool right now. And the biggest problem that I'm trying to solve right now is not necessarily what to fix in the tool, but what options to offer to users. Because obviously you can give every option to users, but then you have sort of slider overwhelm. And so going back to the picture that we have right here from Mad Max, the thing that jumps out to me is, just like Daria said, we have it's decently saturated, but it's got that density, it's got that depth. in the saturation. And that's what I think people respond to. And it's like a subtractive saturation. And you can get this in a lot of different ways. One of my favorite ways of getting this just built into Resolve is you can switch over a node into, I think it's HSV or HSL, a cylindrical color space, and switch that node over to that, and essentially just use the gain if you either, I think if you increase or reduce, you're able to get an increased saturation in an additive, in a subtractive way. And you're able to, instead of getting a brighter saturation, you're able to get this darker sort of feel that we're seeing in this. But also similar, whether you're using Stefan's DCTLs or the one that I'm going to develop, or tools from Cullen, you're able to darken down these tones in a specific way. There's also a tool freely available called Tetra that was developed by Steve Yedlin for the use on Knives Out. They're all sort of similar, and they're just allowing a different way of you to attack these saturation values directly, and then modify the H, S, or L value of them. And so specifically what I'm seeing on this is a much deeper, denser saturation. So we want to adjust the luminance value, not necessarily just the saturation value. And so what a lot of people used to do is they used to key that specific saturation and then use the gamma to darken it down. And obviously you're going to get sort of keying errors with that. So by using a DCTL, you're able to select those things, or you can even use the color warper too. The color warper is a great tool. You can actually, most people just go for the hue and saturation, but there's actually a luminance selector in there on the very right, where you can select those colors and darken them down without actually having to key them. So that's another great solution that you can do to, I actually very frequently go to the orange and the blue to darken the sky down and give it that deep, denser look. So those are a couple different solutions you can do to get those denser colors. Cullen, what do you got?
Okay, so I'll give you guys some thoughts on saturation. Here's how I think about saturation. There's really two things that define, like, if we think about any knob that we might call saturation, there's two things that we need to keep in mind when we talk about saturation. First of all, saturation, like if you go and look up like in the CIE, like term list or dictionary or whatever you want to call it, there's a circular definition set between saturation, colorfulness, and chromaticity. None of them can define themselves except in relation to the other two. So that simply is a way of pointing out that we can't really agree on what exactly saturation means. It's sort of like you guys might have heard me use this quip recently. I've been reading a book on time travel as a concept, and there's a great quote that I know exactly what time is until someone asks me. Saturation is kind of that way. It's like, well, we all kind of know what it means, but when we actually try to come up with a simple and complete definition, it's not so clear. So when we are having to mathematically specifically define what do you want to happen to the pixels when you turn this knob that you're going to call saturation, there's two things that are going to determine that. Number one is going to be, how did you calculate that channel? How did you take, remember I was giving you guys my mention earlier about how I'm taking it back to RGB. That's what's captured. That's what we're showing. So how do we take RGB and determine what of that is color and what of that is something else? That's the fundamental sort of like slicing act that we need to do before we can apply any saturation adjustment. So that's the first big determiner, is like, on what basis are you separating out color from everything else within RGB? Because remember, RGB, there's no S channel in RGB. It's just a certain amount of red, green, and blue. That's number one. And then number two is really, okay, so now you have derived a saturation channel. And if you think about your saturation channel in the way that you would think about like your normal tone, like your shadows, midtones, and highlights, the next thing that is going to determine how a saturation knob looks, feels, behaves is what portion of that channel are you manipulating? Are you working the bottom end? Are you working the middle? Are you working the top? Are you working a narrow region? Are you working a broad region? But it's really those two factors working together that determine how a saturation operator feels. And to give you a specific example, like normal CDL type saturation, like the saturation knob in your Resolve's primaries, that knob feels terrible because it is slicing up the image on a really, really erroneous basis. And then it is applying what's often the worst operator to apply to that saturation channel, which is gain. So that's one specific example, but it's really those two things. If you can control those two things and get those two things in agreement with your creative agenda, then you can get really, really good saturation.
Yeah, and I would point out that there's tons on Mixing Light about this. And in fact, again, I mentioned it earlier, Hector Berebi did a whole breakdown on working in basically HSL. But what he did is he did a great educational effort showing what happens when you rotate hue in RGB versus HSL. He pulled up scopes, he pulled up color bars, and I mean, it was just a really kind of, you may have known it intuitively, but sometimes until you start applying these things to these test images and you really start, you don't really understand at a gut level, like at an intellectual level, what's going on. And he did a great job teaching that. So if this sounds interesting to you, I definitely encourage you to check that out. I think from my perspective, again, yeah, it's about the interplay. I mean, to get really rich saturated colors, they just can't be too bright, right? I mean, you go to a certain brightness level and you're talking neon at that point. And then is that appropriate? And if you take a look at the Mad Max shot and it's like, would neon like colors have served that image? And the answer is no. And if you want that really saturated color, you're going to have to control, your luminance values. And so I think that's a lot of what I'm seeing there. And then, of course, what makes that shot so interesting is it's working opposite ends of the vector scope, right? So, it's using color theory and, what colors work really well against each other. And it's, just go around the vector scope and you can just shift that around. And those opponent colors, which they call, I think, complementary colors, are colors that work really well together. And really they trigger the human brain. And so that's part of that is your color palette. So it's not just the saturation, but the harmony of the color palette or the disharmony of the color palette. And how well it is. And, I think where it gets harder to control saturation, like you see in Mad Max, is if there's no art director on set, right? And you're telling the actors just to show up with whatever they've got in their closet that feels like their character, right? And then everyone shows up with different colors and they're all doing different things. And it might be right for the character, but it might not be right for the story. And then now you have to impose, like the client says, well, I want a color palette. You're like, well, you didn't shoot a color palette. And so now everything becomes a VFX, right? And then everything becomes like it's a job now, where you've got to start, masking stuff out and you've got to start tracking. And, but Mad Max, I mean, admittedly, you take a look at the behind the scenes stuff on that. I mean, it was a visual effects. I mean, the color grade was a visual effects job. And there was tons of windows and tons of mattes and holdbacks and isolations and VFX plates. And all of that has to be harmonized. And you can't do all of that, or you can if you have the budget they had. But it's more effective if you have that in your brain at the start and you put everyone on the same page and say, okay, so good guys, you're going to be this color, bad guys are going to be that color, pull stuff out of your wardrobe that kind of fits in that theme, that type of thing. And maybe for the last scene, you change your shirt because you've now had a revelation and we need to see it as well as feel it, right? And I think that's how you get all of that to work. And so I think probably the person who asked the question, the member who asked the question, in my mind, is they shot the commercial with intention and they knew what they were going for. And it made the colorist's job a lot easier. I could be wrong. Maybe the colorist spent 3 days on a 30-second spot getting it to where it had that meaty, saturated, really well-defined color palette. But chances are that's probably not what happens.
Yeah, complete agreement. There's been so many times where you just want to tell the client, like, they brought you something and they're like, we want this to look like The Godfather. And you're like, well, you should have lit it like The Godfather then. I can't do miracles here. Yeah, absolutely. Set design is a huge, huge factor.
Yeah, I remember early on, like when I first started working Apple Color, and so this is back in the early 2000s, and I had a DP in, and he was amazed at what we were able to do. He goes, I don't need to light anymore. And I'm like, no, stop right there. You're thinking about this completely wrong. Please keep lighting. The reason I can do this is because you gave me this great base image to work with. So please keep doing your job. Don't expect me to be able to do your job. All right. So anyone else want to add anything? Any of our contributors want to add anything on here? Does anyone in the room, if you want to raise your hand, if you have a question on this topic or you want to add a thought, go ahead, raise your hand. Otherwise, there is a question from the room that I'm going to go to. I don't see any raised hands. And MTL, I'm about to come to you. So if you can turn on your video and your audio, and you can ask your question about the depth map tool.
Hi, there we go. Hello.
Hey, Mark.
Hi. I recently had to dive into the depth map on a feature that I'm working on right now, and it was very interesting, and I was overall pleased with it. But boy, it wasn't. I guess I'm always thinking, oh, it's an AI tool. It's just gonna automatically do everything awesome, and of course, it didn't. So I would just want to know what Daria's any experience you have on that. But I found that it flickered a lot when the characters moved. The issue was there's a scene where the characters in front of it's a white walled room, and the director's like, I hate those white walls. And normally I would pull a luminance key to try to get it down a little bit, but that gets tricky too, as you know, because the luminance key can affect the actor. And so I was really impressed with how it did sort of do a pretty good job overall of knocking down the white walls beyond the character, and it highlighted the character a little better. And then I added a touch of dirtiness to the white walls, a little yellow to dinge it up. And it looked great, but boy, I had to do a lot of masking and rotoing because the first shot, he comes up the set of stairs, and on the wood of the frame of the stairs, the handle rail, it started the depth map didn't understand the railing, and it just started flickering. So I had to keep messing with those sliders to get it off of the rails, but keep it. It was not as, I don't know, turnkey as I was hoping. But again, maybe that's just wishful thinking that it's going to be like that. So I'm just curious your thoughts and your experiences, or anyone who has experience with this depth map, if they're seeing that same thing, if there's anything I need to do better in how I set it up.
No, Mark, I trust that you probably did everything exactly right. But it is the case with most secondary tools, especially like the ones that get even more advanced with their approach to like analysis and generation of maps. They are bound to have like certain fail points, as you would expect. So I mean, there are certain circumstances where they work great. Like I've been loving depth map for interviews just because I feel it's so much easier to light up the subject and get them to pop without having to use something as heavy as a magic mask or as like rough as a window. But yeah, what you're describing sounds like it was very visually like intensive, maybe.
Well, it's like the face refinement tool. I love that. And clients will say, do the face refinement tool. I'm like, yeah, it's great until they start moving erratically.
Yeah.
Then it throws it off because of course it can't track with that usually when they move quickly. So yeah, it's just that kind of thing. But yeah, I worked around it. So I did some of the shots I had to do with my old-fashioned luminance key method because I just couldn't get the sliders to do what I needed with the depth map. So I cheated a little bit to get through that scene.
Cullen gave you a thumbs up on that one.
Oh
yeah.
The devil, man. That thing is that will behave itself. I feel like I'm gonna sound like such an old grump, but like the magic mask and like so many of these new tools are like, it's like having like a drunk for a collaborator. It's this guy's been rock solid for the last 2 weeks, but he walked into the office this morning hammered. It's like you can't rely on the guy.
And it's funny that all these DPs, the DP's the one that emailed me and said, hey Mark, why don't you try the depth map? I love how they know more than you do.
Oh, God.
Well, that's Mark, that's funny because I heard you say like, oh, do the face refinement tool. It's like, wait a second, maybe I should talk less during the session so that they don't know exactly what buttons I'm pushing.
I know. I fine line between education and keeping your mouth shut.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the other thing too is, Mark, and this gets to a pet peeve of mine in marketing terms, right? So it's not artificial intelligence, it's machine learning, right? And so they feed a bunch of images into it, and then they tune it until it starts giving them the results they want, and all it's doing is pattern matching. And so the point of failure that Daria is talking about is, what pattern are you now feeding it that it doesn't know what to do with because it hasn't been properly trained, right?
Yeah.
And so it'll keep failing against that shot until one day you do an update where they've now started incorporating maybe another library of images. They've helped tune it a little bit more, that now takes that foreground railing and knows what to do with it. And then all of a sudden it doesn't fail on that, but there are going to be other images that it's going to fail on, right? So all it is, all these artificial intelligence tools are just pattern matching tools. That's all they are. It's machine learning. AI component is pure marketing speak, but it's legitimately machine learning, and it's very cool. And when it works, it saves us tons of time. And when it doesn't, it's kind of frustrating because I saw it work, you know?
Right. Last thing I'll say before I go off, Daria, you mentioned earlier how you tell the DPs or the clients, you didn't shoot it that way. You want it to be the Godfather. That's the bane of my existence. I get that on every job. I just did a feature a couple months ago. They said, has to look like No Country for Old Men. And when I say that, I said, well, did you shoot it like that? Did you shoot it like that? Yeah. And this is a new director. She goes, yes, we did. and it's weird. I get mixed reviews on when you say that to clients. Some understand and some get offended when you say it.
I mean, I mostly say it inside my head, just for
okay. Well,
out there for any young colorists watching. Don't say it out loud.
Maybe I shouldn't physically say it. Then I'll say it in my head. All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, MTO.
So I want to add one more thing. I saw this morning, and it's an important quote. The difference between an amateur and a professional is all about the process. And I think that's really important right here. Although we can get new tools like Magic Mask and really insert any new tool you want, it's really all about how we go about fixing our particular problem. And in this case, if we have, like Mark, you were talking about, we have this problem and you want to isolate the background. In this case, you're trying a new tool. Really, you have a workflow that for the most part worked for it. And although we have a new tool that you might be able to try out, the fact is, most of the time I still have to bring in the old-fashioned tools to help babysit these new tools. And I love what Cullen said about it's like a drunk showing up to work. We still need to have a supervisor watch these guys to make sure that they don't drop the ball on that one time. And I think that's the best description I've ever heard of these new AI tools. For all the time they do save, you still have to employ that guy to make sure that they don't drop that ball that once. And until they get to that point that they're 100%, you have to make sure that there's somebody watching them, whether that's you or somebody else. And so until then, if you expect those tools to work 100%, you're going to continually be disappointed. And until then, you have to have that backup.
Yeah, and we're at the end of the call, but I'll add one final thought, which is how to deal with this in session. And the way I deal with this in session is whenever I try a tool like this, I will tell the client, look, all right, I'm going to try something here. Give me, and then come up with a number, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes. You don't want to experiment for more than 5 minutes on the client's dime. But give me 3 minutes. I'm going to try something different, and I'm going to try it on the shot. When I look at the sequence, my biggest concern is, it works great on the single, it works on the 2-shot, and it'll fail on the wide, right? So I'll look at the scene where I'm thinking of applying this tool, where I need consistency, and then I'll say, all right, what's the shot I think is most likely to fail? Let me run this through and process that shot. All right, it worked there. All right, now let me try one of the other angles, process that. All right, it worked. Okay, now that I know that it works on all the angles, now I can actually start incorporating that into my color grade. And then I'll be like, all right, let's move forward. We're going to start color grading again, right? So I sometimes like to pause the session and get the buy-in from the client to just say, look, refresh your coffee, make your phone calls, give me 3 minutes, and then I'll be back, right? So that's my method for dealing with that in session. All right, so we are at the end of our call. 1 hour went super fast. I want to thank everyone. The comments had a lot of great links to all of this. When this gets posted on MixingLight.com, I will extract the links from the comments. We'll put them into the text that accompanies this video. And then it'll disappear off of YouTube. So these stay on YouTube until they appear on MixingLight, and they disappear off of YouTube. So on behalf of Daria and Cullen and Jason, and then Neil, who joined us, and Mark Todd Osborne, who joined us, I'm Patrick Inhofer for MixingLight. thank you for being with us here on this office hours, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.